Good morning. Two hands to go through. These are hands where I c-bet out of position. We get to showdown. Both these hands are big hands. I won these hands. But I want to go through and see if I could pick out the range of the players that were calling me. So here's hand number one. I've got ace jack spades under the gun. Open raise. I get called by the button and by the big blind. So big blind, I don't have a huge number of hands on him, 38. Right now he's playing 13% VPIP, 0 PFR. So I think if anything, if we are looking at raises, or calling raises, we've got 16%. He might be a little bit tight. I mean, he's playing 13% of hands, so he may be somewhat tighter, realizing that he's going to be under the gun or out of position throughout the entire hand. Maybe something like that, 25%. He didn't 3-bet. Maybe he's only going to 3-bet, queens plus ace king. Out of 38 hands, it's possible that he doesn't really get a hand to play. So, ace jack suited against that range, it's going to be ahead 60%. That's pretty good. This player, the button, I've got a lot more information on. Over 800 hands, he's playing 20-10 with a 3-bet of 5%. When we look at his preflop calls on the button, he's calling 17%. So calling 17% and 3-betting basically 2%. So 1 out of 66. And it's not like, I think he said 95%, 95 hands to raise an early position raiser, and he's only done it twice versus some of these other positions. Could be a fluke, or it could be that he's recognizing that under the guns are strong. Early position players have a strong range, so he doesn't really raise that, that much. So 17%. If we say 20%, let's do all of those. Take that out. Let's take these offsuits because I don't think a whole lot of people play them. That's 20.4. Take out queens plus ace king. We are at 17.8%. Probably a suitable calling range. And we, with ace jack, is at 58%. So I think we're okay. We should be ahead. Flop comes all spades, which is great for us. We're three players. Now we have to think about how can we maximize our expectation here. So villain 1 checks, no big surprise. I think he's going to check to us, and then we have to consider, should we bet? Should we just check here? Play it slow. I mean, we have basically the virtual nuts right now, but trips. If he happens to have trips, which he could have. I mean, he's got these pocket pairs. He's going to call. Could have 8, 8-9, 8-7, 10-8, 9-7. I think there's hands here that can call. Same thing with this player. Definitely have hands that I think he could call. And if I bet and this guy calls and this guy calls, hey, that's actually pretty good. That's pretty good for us. I think the thing that leads me towards betting here is it's a dry board. It doesn't figure to hit. I mean, of all of the ranges, it's going to hit their calling range harder than mine. Yeah, I can have, your pocket pairs in there as well. But in terms of getting, straight draws, and so forth, it's probably their calling range a lot harder than my calling range. So I think this board just seems like it lends itself well to a c-bet regardless of what I'm holding. And it just so happens that since I have the ace jack spades, that c bet is actually going to be c betting for value. So I think a c bet is good. Now, should I bet half pot or should I bet larger? I think half pot's probably okay. Try to keep a larger number of hands in their range. If I bet, half pot, I can see any of the pairs calling. So we'll say all pairs plus. I think your, with and without flush draws, I think your flush draws are going to be calling. Second nut, maybe the third nut. Weak flush draws. I think those figure it out to be your pocket pair type hands. Open-ended straight draws, gut shots might call if I bet half pot, whereas if I bet 2/3, maybe we're gonna fold out some of these weaker pairs and middle pairs because they think maybe I'm betting an overcard, or maybe I have a spade. That's all that I could really think of. So let's say he's got a pretty wide range. If he's gonna call 61.5% of the time, and we're 95% equity, we should be betting. What does his stat say? He folds a c-bet when he's in position 54% of the time. So I do think he's probably calling here, not with junk, but probably with draws and with pairs. Gut shots, maybe. Just kind of depends on textures, board textures, and so forth. So I do think we should be c-betting. I bet 2/3. I think that might be a little bit too big. I think a half pot bet to encourage callers. And he calls, so that's good there. And I do think with this big blind, he probably calls somewhat a similar range, so probably pairs, 6s and 7s probably. What about the 5s? Maybe once, but I don't think a weak pair is going to come along. Ace 3, 2s, 4s. I think he's just going to give up and say, I'm done with the hand. I think he's calling with your flush draws. This player, since he's been somewhat tight, I think would probably just do flush draws and not necessarily gut shots or open-ended straight draws. So I think he's calling 37% of the time. He folded, so let's just get him out. So we're dealing with this range, and if we take out the straights, you can see that, it drops our equity, but 95 to 94, basically 95%. I think we're still good. All right, so we see a turn King of Hearts. I think that's good for us. It doesn't pair the board. I think that's the only thing we're hoping to dodge. He demonstrated that he called once. That definitely hits our range. So now, if I didn't have a pair, it is entirely likely that I have paired up now. Question is, should I bet? Should I check? This guy's turn float bet is 67%. I think this could be a situation where I can check here, expect to see him to bet, and then I can call. I think he would check, or he would bet here with probably most of his range. So we're going to say things like that. Maybe not open-ended straight draws or gut shots, but perhaps. That's 100%. His weak flush, if I check to him, definitely. I think we're looking at wide range that he's going to bet. And then I call, and we're at 97.8. If I bet here, I think I give him reason to fold these weak pairs, middle pairs, pocket pair below, top pair hands. So 9s, 10s, jacks, I'm going to say probably still call. His top pair is going to call kings. His sets, his flushes are going to call. Maybe I think he'll fold his weak flushes. So I think if I bet now, he's only going to continue with 39.5. We're still at 95% equity, but calling 39% of the time for, let's say, a half pot bet versus betting half pot bet, or perhaps even a pot size bet, 80% of the time, I think checking is appropriate. I bet basically 2/3, and he called. So at this point, I'm going to put him on something like this, definitely, which we're still ahead. And then the river comes out and is a 7 of hearts. So Now, most likely hands, I think it comes down to, okay, the flush draw missed. So if I bet, and let's say I bet 25 or 26, which is half pot, what do I think he's going to call with? Definitely flushes and straights. I think top pair is going to call. Pocket pair below top pair. If I bet that, he can probably call here. Looking to just trying to, you could say, keep me honest. He doesn't believe that I have a king, so he's going to call with queens, jacks, or tens. I don't think he's going to call ace high or no mate hand. So at this point, he would be calling 86.7% of the time, and basically I'm beating everything. If I check, I think he probably bets his flush and his sets, and maybe his top pair, but he probably checks the pocket pair below top pair, the nines, tens, jacks. So he'd probably be happy just to see the board. Maybe he would take a stab at it. So his river pro bet here is, or his river float is 0. He's never had that opportunity, but it just kind of makes sense to check behind. So now, 53% he would bet versus 86.7 he would call. So I think now, we should have checked the turn, but now on the river we would bet, and I did. I think I bet too big, but at the same time, it works out. So I think better bet is going down to half to get a call. I didn't. I bet pot, and he raised, shoved all in. And the question is, what is he going to shove all in with? It could be a bluff. I think the only logical flush that's going to do that is the second nut. So king 10 and king queen. That's it. I don't even know why sets would do it. I think king queen, king 10, 10 of spades. I think that's got to be it. And of course, I'm gonna call. I got the nut flush, so I think this works out. I called all in, and we get to see his hand, and he shows queen 10. So close. We add that one more. So here's a situation where, let's go back. He flopped the flush, and that explains why he's calling. So calls with flush. King of hearts, he calls again. Now I think maybe the 2/3 looks better. 2/3 bet looks better. I think if I check, he is gonna bet, and he could bet. So let's go back to the turn. I check. He may bet something small, and then on the 7, I think if I check and he bets the pot, I'm gonna raise and he's gonna call no matter what, probably. So I think no matter what, we're gonna call. I think a better play on that turn when we hold the nuts, and given that he's float betting 2/3 of the time, I think the better play is to check that turn, let him bet and call, because I think there's going to be plenty of times where we fire out a c-bet and then check that turn, especially firing out the c-bet on a fairly dry board. And this helps protect our hands. Or maybe this is a good double barrel. Dry board, this hits our range harder than it hits his, so we continue firing out a c-bet. So I don't know. I think I'm going to be going back and forth on this hand. Maybe this is a double barrel hand. And it just works out that, if I ignore the fact that I actually had ace jack, that double barrel works good. And then on the river, when the 7 gets there, only betting again if I actually have, a solid hand versus check calling, let's say top pair. All right, so this is hand number 1. Almost got the hand. Let me pause, close things out, and get hand number 2. All right, so hand number 2, I have ace 2 this time. Ace 2 suited under the gun. I'm going to open raise, and then I get called by 3 players behind me. I don't have a whole lot of hands on these first two, but I do have hands on this player. So the fact that he raised, he's showing loose passive tendencies. He is right now only 5 hands, probably loose. I mean, he called after there was already a caller, and then this guy is also calling. They're probably going to be somewhat similar ranges. So we're probably looking at, let's eliminate our queens plus ace king. No one's really showing a strong tendency to 3-bet. Maybe ace 9. We need to make sure we have a decent range. Maybe something like that versus ace 2. So, we're not going to be that great. And, that's against one range. We're up against, 3 other players. So we're going to be pretty wide. So on this board now, boards dry, but I think this is going to hit calling range more harder than my range. I mean, I'm not really going to have a lot of 4-5s in my range, but these players could have 4-5s in my range. But we do have flush draw, so I do think we can barrel. I think we c-bet here. I think we're going to get folds. I think we'll get called a fair amount of the time, but we have cards that we can barrel on. So any jack, queen, king, ace, we can barrel. Any club we can barrel. Probably any 5 or maybe any 4 we can barrel. I don't think I'd barrel with the 2. So I do think we have quite a few cards that we could barrel with. I think, and I do think we could also barrel on like a 3, a 6, or a 7 as well. So really, we're looking at maybe hoping to avoid a 4 or a 5. I think those are the not as good, but also like 8 or 9 or 10 are probably hands where we should probably just check behind. So I think overall we have a lot of hands that we can barrel with. So I do think we can bet. I bet 2/3. I think that's fine. These guys fold, and this villain 5 is going to call here. So when he calls, let's see. Let's give him a range. So let's say all pairs plus. Let's give him flush draw, open and straight draws. We'll give him a gut shot because that includes some of these over cards. That's 50%. Fold to c-bet is in position is 33%, so 6 out of 18. On average, he does not like to fold, so I'm gonna guess he's gonna probably call 2-card backdoor flush draws as well. So that's a continues with 54.7. Maybe even some of these overcards. I think that the overcards would have to be the ace high hands. So let's just say all of the ace high hands he calls at this point, along with the 2-card backdoor flush draws. Is the diamonds? Yeah, I think we'll leave that there. All right, so against that calling range, we're at 52%. I mean, our ace is pretty good. So I'm happy with that. Turn is a 2. It's not my favorite. 2s, 4, and 5 again are not my favorite, but it now gives us a pair. So we beat all of those drawing type of hands. So we now are already beat, open ends. Hold on. We now beat all of the ace high hands that he would have been calling with, which I think if I bet again, he's probably going to call again. So we beat the ace high hands, and I think we should also fire out the c-bet as well, because we're hoping now perhaps we can get rid of cards that are going to have some equity against us. So make it a little bit better that a 9 or a 10 doesn't come and allow him to beat us. How much should we bet? I think we are going to look at so we bet 2/3. I think if we bet 2/3, we're going to probably get called by top pair and the over pair. I think we're going to get raised by the straight and probably by sets. So If he get raised, then it just kind of defaults down to, let's look at the pot odds, see if we have the odds to call. I think maybe 2 pairs also going to raise. Over pair might be a little bit hesitant. I kind of would have expected over pairs to raise on the flop. So if I bet, I think top pair, middle pair, weak pair is 5-3 and 4-3. So that's going to be a gut shot. We'll say he calls those flush draws. Is it going to be all flush draws? Maybe. Yeah, maybe. We're actually going to delete some because 5-4 is a straight. So we don't, he would have, raised that, I believe. Gut shots probably fold, overcards fold at this point. So I think if we bet, we're getting called 42.9% of the time. And, that's not the greatest. If called, we're only 39.5% equity. But we have fold equity. So he's folding, over 50% of the time. So I do think we can fire out a second barrel. I did 2/3, and that's kind of, I think, trying to represent that we have, a solid hand, and he calls. So let's go under the assumption that he's going to be calling with those hands. And then we get to the river and we hit a 3 of clubs. So he didn't raise. I think I'm going to exclude our full houses at this point. All right. Let's take out our flushes. So now, if we look at just all of his cards that he can have, 16% of his hands are flushes, 26 are over pairs, 6 are 3 of a kinds. If I bet here, so the pot 72, he has 66.48. I think if I bet pot, he's probably only going to call with a flush, probably with the 3 of a kind, and over pair. I think top pair could find a fold. We could say 50% of the time. So if I bet pot, he's calling 48.9%. We've got that locked up because I don't think he has a full house. I think trips would have raised me. If I bet half pot, would a top pair call? Maybe. If I check, do I think he's going to shove? His floats that I have is 0 out of 0. Call C bets in position 50%. I think he's going to probably call and maybe even call with the top pair type hand. So I do think we should bet. And I think really the only play is just to shove them all in. Hope he calls. I bet half pot and he calls. And I think we probably miss value here because I think if whatever he calls half pot with, he's probably going to call all in with. So he calls and he shows 4-6. So he shows that top pair hand or middle pair hand. Geez. So I guess maybe we're wrong. Maybe he'll call middle pair, maybe even weak pair. So 84.8%. So let's see this. 84.8% of the time, he will call. And I will win the half pot bet. So what was that half pot bet? So I bet 36.4. I will win 36.4 plus 72.84. So win his bet plus spot. Plus, hold on. Let's go back here. I wonder if I can't edit that. 0.848 times. Okay. 848 times our 36.4. Try this again. 0.864. Those times he calls, I will win the pot 72.84 plus the 36.4. And the other times, 1 minus 0.864, I will only win what's in the pot. All right, so my EV, my expected here is 104. Now, if I shove all in and he only calls with the overpair, now it's 48.9%. So 0.489 times, I will get 72.84 plus 66.48. 66.48 plus the 1 minus 0.489 times 72.84. So I get 105. So I guess it's 105 versus 104. I guess it doesn't really matter as much as whichever one's highest EV. Difference in the call versus what we expect to make isn't that big. I do think, though, that we should have probably just went ahead and pushed them all in and hope he calls. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed these two hands. These are what I'll consider kind of difficult hands because I just fired barrel after barrel, but I think by reviewing these hands, we can kind of assess, was I making the correct move? Was I planning for the second barrel? And definitely when we started on that first hand, we didn't really consider what's the quality texture of the flop, what hand should we barrel with, whereas on the second attempt or on the second hand, we did consider, okay, we do have a lot of hands that we can barrel with, so I think we're justified in c-betting here with the plan to fire that second barrel on certain cards. All right, look tomorrow for a couple more hands.